Hello and good afternoon. My name is Andrew Richard Albanese, and I'm glad to be here with you again for the 2025 edition of Every Library Live Banned Books Week Fest. I am a writer, a former publisher, a veteran book industry reporter for nearly 30 years, and the founder and editor of the Words and Money newsletter and website, which I launched in the spring of this year with one overarching goal, which is to properly center the work of libraries in the publishing industry media landscape, because I, for one, believe that libraries are absolutely central to the 21st century reading and writing enterprise. And if you think so too, you can check us out and subscribe at www.wordsandmoney.com. For our conversation this afternoon, I'm delighted to host two outstanding authors. Bruce Holsinger is the author of multiple books and a medieval scholar at the University of Virginia. And his latest book, Culpability, is a family thriller set against the moral fallout of artificial intelligence, and it was an Oprah book pick. We also have Harvard professor Janet Rich Edwards, who is an epidemiologist by training. I think I have that right, yes. And also the author, the debut author, I should say, of the forthcoming book, Canticle, which is a historical novel that follows a visionary young woman who joins a community of rebel mystics and risks everything to stand against power. Sounds like an inspirational tale for the times we live in now. Before we get started, a word about our sponsor, Every Library, which is the first and only national political organization for libraries in the United States. It is a truly remarkable organization that works tirelessly across the country to support the freedom to read, to defend the First Amendment, and to make sure that libraries have the resources they need to serve their communities. You can check them out at everylibrary.org. And if you can, please do support their work with a contribution. Their work is super important now more than ever. And with that, let's get started. I guess what I'll do is I'll toss it to each of our authors to have them do a little bit of an intro on their own about who they are and what they write. And I guess I flipped a coin before we started, so I guess I'll start with you, Bruce.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thanks to Every Library for hosting this. And it's amazing to support Banned Books Week. It's such an important effort. I'm thrilled to be here. So yeah, my name is Bruce Holsinger. I'm actually an English professor at the University of Virginia. I've taught here for the last 20 years. My specialty is medieval literature. I teach classes from Beowulf to Milton. There's a lot of banned books in there. I work on Chaucer, on comparative medieval literature. And I used to teach at the University of Colorado in Boulder. And when I was teaching in Boulder, that's when I started writing fiction. And for a long time, I wrote without any kind of fruitfulness. I just wrote a couple of novels that couldn't find an agent. And finally, I did. My first novel came out in 2014. It's a historical thriller set in the late Middle Ages. And my most recent book is Culpability. As you were saying, Andrew, it's a family drama set in the age of artificial intelligence. It's thinking about morality and culpability and responsibility as these non-human forces are, coming into our lives in a big way. So I'm both an academic and a novelist.
Janet, welcome.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for hosting us. And like Bruce, just an enormous fan of libraries, of course. We all grew up in libraries and learned to read there and can't say enough good things. So like Bruce, I don't know whether I'm an academic and a closet novelist or I'm becoming a novelist who's a closet academic. I got to figure that out. But I'm an epidemiologist. I've been at Harvard Medical School and Harvard School of Public Health for 20 or 30 years. I study women's health. I look at some of the connections between, say, pregnancy complications and a woman's future risk of cardiovascular disease. And I started writing late. It wasn't until my kids left home and I thought, I can double down and work harder, like so many people do, or I can try a new trick. And I had always loved reading. I think I've had a novel in my hand since I was 8 years old. And wrote a sentence and wrote another sentence, and I was hooked. Oh, I should tell you about Canticle. So my debut novel, coming out December 2nd, is grounded in what's arguably the history of the first women's movement in the Western world. It's set in 13th century Bruges, And it follows Elise, a headstrong young woman who's prone to mystical visions. She's fleeing an unwanted marriage and finds refuge with the Beguines, which only Bruce knows who the Beguines are. The Beguines, this is the movement, okay? The Beguines were self-sufficient communities of women that sprung up in the late Middle Ages who refused the rule of the church, which was a radical thing. When Elise begins to perform what might be miracles, the rising fervor of the town attracts the attention of a local bishop and troubles ensue. It's a story about faith, about doubt, and importantly for this week in this show, about literacy and the quiet rebellion of women who are fighting for knowledge.
Great. Bruce, I wanted to turn back to you. I wanted to ask you a little bit about culpability to get us going here, because it seems like a bit of a departure for you as a novelist. Obviously, AI is a very hot topic right now. Tell us how you landed on writing a book with AI as a central theme.
Yeah. So my last two novels before Culpability, The Gifted School and The Displacements, are both about kind of modern American families in crisis. And I write novels that are kind of on the edge of our moment right now, and thinking about the near future. And, Culpability didn't start out as a novel about artificial intelligence. It was the premise the premise of the novel is that a family is on their way to a lacrosse tournament in Delaware. They're in a minivan. Their son Charlie is at the wheel. But he's not driving. He's 17 years old. The car is in self-driving or autonomous mode. The other members of the family are sitting in the car, and they have this horrible accident. And the rest of the novel is thinking about who or what is responsible. Everybody in the car feels some level of responsibility. Charlie's mom, Lorelei Shaw, is a world-leading expert in the field of ethics, the ethics of artificial intelligence. And so in some ways, it wasn't a departure. It was, as I was thinking about these issues of autonomy and autonomous driving and so on, and I'd come up with the idea and was kind of in the middle of a first draft in the summer of 2022. And again, AI hadn't even entered my mind as a phrase of what this was about. And then ChatGPT came to public consciousness. That was this huge explosion in the fall of 2022. And I realized, okay, that's what this novel is about. This novel is about artificial intelligence. It's thinking about the interlacing of our lives with these new non-human forces. So I think in some ways it wasn't a departure, but then as soon as I understood, and I'm sure Janet will agree, and you probably too, Andrew, that sometimes you're writing something and you're not quite sure where you are, you're on unstable ground, and then you'll have an epiphany and suddenly you'll understand what this whole thing is about. And that's what happened with me when okay, then the novel. Then I started really picking up on other aspects of AI, and there's another strand in the book about a chatbot that the middle daughter in this family befriends, Alice. She invents this avatar named Blair, and has this really kind of dark relationship with her, and then you see that playing out in these text threads through the novel, in about 8 or 9 places, and a number of other ways that AI came into the plot. So again, it kind of developed organically, and the AI sort of layered itself in as I went along.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't know that the initial drafts of the story preceded the explosion of ChatGPT and all these other things. I'm still interested to know about your personal interactions with generative AI and ChatGPT and what you think about all this stuff.
My personal interactions. Well, I don't have an AI companion, I'll tell you that. I suppose the way that with ChatGPT, with the large language models, which are actually, aside from the chatbot conversation, are not a big theme in Culpability. My interactions, and I'm sure Janet will say the same, I'm just so concerned about our students and about what these things mean for reading and writing. In a moment when you can just enter a prompt and have a 5-page essay spit out, and they're getting better and better, they're getting more and more undetectable. What does this mean for the history of writing and for the history of books and for even the way we read books? You can now, my colleagues will tell you, you can upload the class reading in a PDF and say, what are 5 smart things I could say in class today about this book? And, suddenly we're just in a completely different world. So all of my colleagues, we're all thinking about how to confront the spectacle of AI, of large language models. So I would say less on a personal level than on a professional level. I'm very concerned about where we are with these things right now.
Jen, I'm interested. I can't wait to start talking with you about Canticle as well. But since we're talking about AI, I thought I would go to you and get you to follow up on that too for your impressions of this technology.
Yeah. I think, being in the sciences, have maybe a little bit of a different view. My students don't tend to write papers so much.
No.
And I see a lot of productivity increases. I have students, postdocs who are, coding analyses and, R and SAS and Stata and trying to go back and forth. And it's a great translator. So that's a wonderful tool. I can also see, in students whose first language isn't English, they're sending me better first drafts because I think they're running it through the large language models. On the shadow side, I worry that jobs are going to be lost. I think it's going to be a really painful transition for young scientists. In the same way that Bruce is worried about the writing weakening, I'm worried that the analytic muscle is also going to weaken, because I think it won't be long until, these models are not only writing our code, but interpreting it. So it's hard to know what the future holds. On the novelist side, I have to tell you the one time I took a section of my dialogue that was really stuck and I put it into ChatGPT just to see what it could do, and it didn't do anything better. And I feel like I need to come clean about that one attempt. But the time it really did help me was for a podcast I had done, and this podcaster was known for asking the author about the main themes of their novel. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be like a deer in the headlights, because like Bruce, I write kind of organically. I
hate themes.
I don't set out to write themes. I write a story. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to take my Goodreads reviews, of which at that point there were 102. And I put them into Perplexity, and I said, tell me what the themes are. And it was gorgeous, spot on.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
It was amazing.
That is fascinating. Yeah, that's a really interesting use. Wow. Well, now let's talk about Canticle and go back to the Middle Ages. I'm so fascinated by your journey from epidemiology into writing a debut novel. Talk to me about that experience. Where did this story come from? How did you undertake this journey?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit of a lifelong journey in some ways. The real inspiration for Canticle came from when I was in my 20s in the Peace Corps in West Africa. And it was, if you're old enough to remember, we were calling it the Ethiopian famine back in the mid 80s, but it was the whole Sahel. And, I was 22 years old and I didn't really know death, and we were losing patients and the lizards in my compound were dying. I didn't know what to make of it. And somebody sent me a book that included some of the medieval mystics. And I'm not Catholic, I'm not even particularly religious, but there was something about what those women were writing, in the face of plague and famine and drought and flood and war. And in front of all these calamities, they were writing about joy. And I thought, oh, there's something there for me. And so, I left the Peace Corps and I came home and I had a career and raised kids. And it wasn't until later that I began thinking about the lives of these women. Because if you were a medieval woman and you were getting showings from God, you were either going to be seen as demon, possessed by a demon, as you're likely to be seen that way as you were to be a vessel of God. So these women were risking a lot by writing down these visions. And I thought, wow, what would it be like to be a young woman and to suddenly have these showings from God? What would you make of it? What would you say when people started attributing miracles to you? And I thought, wow, I think a woman might have some doubts. And that's really where it started.
Wow.
If I can just say something about Canticle, I was so moved by this novel, and I'm someone who's studied medieval literature for 35 years, and so I've read a lot of historical fiction set in the period that I study that gets it wrong or that just sentimentalizes the period. And Janet's book, I think, is such a brilliant evocation of this whole world, and the lives of these women are so, there's one woman mystic called Christina the Astonishing. I'm sure you read her book, and it is about that joy, about how there's this one moment where God just whirls her around like a top, and then she stops, and she gets this resonance in her throat, just the joy of God. And I just the way you nail the period is just so wonderful. So I can't say enough about that book.
Well, thank you. I want to cast a little praise back your way. I couldn't get enough of Culpability. I just gobbled it up. I gave it to my husband. I've given it to all my family and friends. I just think it's so gripping. And I mean, not only is it a page turner, and you're grappling with these interesting issues about AI, but it's also a really good commentary on marriage.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, just the characterizations are just fabulous. I loved it.
Somehow I'm just obsessed with marriage and families and kids and so on. So I write these family dramas with, contemporary things. I keep wanting to go back. Your novel made me want to go back to medieval writing, but we'll see.
That's great.
Yeah.
Bruce, you have another fan too, in Oprah Winfrey, I hear. Tell me what it was like to get that call. That's a call that I think every author in the business dreams about getting.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was ridiculous and ridiculous and thrilling, and just I mean, of course, I thought it was AI generated, but when she called, I was in DC, and my publicist had set up this Zoom meeting, what was supposed to be a Zoom meeting, and then her story was, oh, the Zoom is busted, so you're going to get a call instead. And so I was waiting for a call from Nicole, my publicist. That was the pretense. And then the phone rings, and it's Oprah Winfrey. And, my hands start shaking, and she just is just gushing about the book. And I just think, this is our summer read. And I just couldn't believe it. And, but when I went out to Seattle to film her book club with her, and then I went to New York to film the CBS Mornings segment where they did the announcement. And the thing that really struck me was how deeply she knew the book. She could quote it. She just had this in some ways she knew it better than I did. And same with Gail, who was her co-host on this story. And it just was exciting to get that kind of attention on it, and get the attentiveness. And yeah, it's just, I mean, there are 100 novels came out last summer that easily could have gotten this nod, and it just feels so lucky. And it's been amazing. So.
Well, good for you. Congratulations. And Janet, we're crossing our fingers for you too. Maybe you'll get a call like this in the future. But let's talk a little bit about change. We started talking about AI a little bit. And I'm a former I guess I am a book industry reporter, but I spent 16 years at Publishers Weekly, in which I basically wrote about change in the industry, and how the industry grappled with change. And it's on one hand, the book has had a pretty good run as a format, right? It's been relatively stable for centuries. But with this new technology, with digital, with social media, with AI. Can we talk a little bit about where we see books and reading and writing all heading? Janet, do you want to offer some ideas about technological upheaval in the book industry?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying I'm a historical fiction writer, not a futurist. So your guess is probably a lot better than mine. But I do think we're living at kind of a hinge moment, and that future historians, future historical fiction writers are going to be looking back and writing about us and these choices and events right now. I worry that Bruce and I might be the last class of novels that will be definitively written by human beings. And I do wonder, will there be a way to put a stamp on what's human generated and what isn't? And will people care? I really don't know. I know, Bruce, what do you think?
Oof. Yeah, that's a very dark prediction. Maybe you are a futurist. Yeah.
Well, let's hope I'm not.
It's funny, I'm actually less worried about the history of novels and literature and poetry in the age of AI than I am about everything else. I think these beings, whatever they are, who knows? Maybe we'll start collaborating with them. I think there's a lot of that going on already, and has been for the last 4 or 5 years. If you look at, there's a wonderful story by the Canadian writer Sheila Heti in the New Yorker from a couple years ago that was a result of her collaboration with Claude, an early version of Claude. And the story consists of Claude's responses to her prompts. And Sheila didn't publish her prompts. And so the story is this uncanny, weird thing about birth and eggs and being, and it's really creepy. And I don't have an issue with that because she was very self-conscious about it. I think what Janet is maybe talking about, and there's been more and more stories of this, is people just generating a novel with AI and never admitting it, right? Your question, Andrew, about technology and technological upheavals. I think of the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, a period that I study. And of course, it was a kind of massification, you could call it, where suddenly printed books are available to a mass audience in a way they never had been. And then that just kind of goes on a hockey stick over the next several centuries to our own moment, where just the more of literature, the book, just available more and more, including the Bible, the Book of Common Prayer, and so on. But this feels very different. This doesn't feel, I think the quantity is a very different kind of thing. We're living in limitless slop right now, AI slop, in terms of the written word. And I think it's not just that it's writing is available to more people as consumers, it's available to more people as producers. And that is, there are some really scary elements of that. There are very democratic elements to that. And I think we're in a place right now where we have no idea what's coming. And it's very, very hard to predict.
Yeah.
But I think Janet's right. There's something comforting about being in a generation that, like, yes, this is my book. I wrote it and it is on paper. And I love, I do wonder how much longer that's going to last.
Is there any temptation to use AI as a tool in your writing, either of you? Janet, you probably have, as an epidemiologist, AI probably comes in there, but I'm wondering how you're approaching it from your own personal perspectives as authors.
I'm trying to stay away from it. I don't know. It feels like a little bit of an issue of integrity. Mm-hmm. I do use it sometimes for research to try to find new leads on papers, because as Bruce is familiar, a lot of the if you really want the details, on the Middle Ages, you really need to go to academic sources. And JSTOR is my best friend, but a lot of the leads I can generate from AI now. At the beginning, it was hallucinating a lot of references, but now it's stopped doing that. So I'll use it for research a bit, but definitely not for the writing.
Yeah,
I don't know.
For me, it's less an issue of authenticity and integrity than pleasure. I mean, I just love writing. I love writing my own sentences. And why would I love figuring things out, finding a good verb. Why would I give that over to a machine? It just doesn't seem like it's just like getting high or something. I wouldn't give the marijuana to a machine so it can get high. I want to right? I want to experience that on my own. So, I just get such huge pleasure from spending those quiet hours in the morning, the early morning when I usually write fiction, just building my own stuff and craft. And it just seems, sure, if you want to spit out a bunch of prose, I guess you could do that, but it just doesn't appeal to me as a method.
Yeah, and that really doesn't appeal to me as a reader. I come from a publishing background, and one of my early bosses always said, we publish authors, not books. And that always stuck with me. Are people really clamoring for authorless books in driverless cars, or will we find some equilibrium there? That's the way I sort of view this.
Yeah. Well, driverless cars, that's the premise of Culpability.
Yeah.
That's different. So here's where I come down on that. I don't know if you all have been to San Francisco or LA or Vegas or Austin recently and ridden in a Waymo.
I won't get in one, but I have seen them. Yeah.
Now, here's a question, but you will get in an Uber. You will get in a Lyft, I bet. Where as soon as you get in, the driver starts texting for their next Right. So you're going down a highway and the guy's like, I'm going to get my next fare. So I've been in Waymos. I've been in a number of them recently, and like they're I guarantee you, that is the wave of the future in terms of driving around, and they're so much safer already. Like the studies that have been done on like driver hours, on passenger hours, there's just no comparison. So that it's going to be really like the number one job of Waymo is to keep you safe. The number one job of an Uber driver is to get his next fare. So I don't know. I feel like that's one of the moral dilemmas that I talk about in the novel, or that the character Lorelei is wrestling with. And it's fascinating. It's uncanny. It's creepy, but it's coming. So
I have to admit, I have the 65 by 65 list, 65 things I want to do by the time I'm 65, and taking a Waymo was one of them. So I was out in San Francisco about a month ago, and I took a Waymo, and it was raining. And of course, the windshield wipers are going. And halfway through the ride, I was like, wait,
who cares about
why are there windshield wipers? This
make you feel probably safer.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. It took me about 30 seconds to accommodate. I thought it was actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, it is Banned Books Week, so let's talk a little bit about the situation we're in with banned books now. And I feel like I have the right two authors to talk about this, because there's this small minority out there that really kind of wants to take us back to the Middle Ages in some respects with regard to what they want on bookshelves or not. So
all right. I have to defend the Middle Ages here. So
well, how aware of you about the landscape currently with book banning in the country are you both? Are you familiar with the surge in book banning that's going on, I assume? Basically the way I could say that like book banning has changed is it used to be one parent who would go in and challenge a book that they didn't want their kids to read, and it would get dealt with in a normal way. Now it's become like the outrage machine, with people showing up to school board meetings with lists generated on social media. It feels a lot more turbocharged and dangerous, I think, today. So, as authors and as scholars and of course as readers, I wonder if you might share your perspective on the current challenges to the freedom to read, and maybe feel free to drop a little history on us as well, if that helps. Bruce, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's a historical point. I think the Middle Ages, different parts of the Middle Ages were more tolerant of particular kinds of books than the Renaissance was. So I think the Renaissance is a better historical analogy, like the Reformation in England, when they started burning the prayer books of medieval Catholics. They started burning Latin prayer books. Or when Spanish colonists colonized the Americas, they burned tens of thousands of Inca codices, like beautiful screenfold books by the thousands. So it was really the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery that I think was much more of a book banning society than the Middle Ages was. And the Middle Ages has its own issues, I think. So whenever I hear that about about going back to the Middle Ages, my medievalist hackles go up. In terms of our contemporary world, I think you're exactly the way you characterize it. Nothing wrong with a parent going in and say, I don't want my kid to read that book. Totally fine, right? It's when governors go in. It's when state legislatures go in. It's when presidents or senators start objecting to content. And it's when these political organizations come in, and often the bans will be on the basis of ignorance and prejudice. And it's just such a shame. I mean, I think my author friends who are really being affected by this right now are more young adult writers and children's book writers who are trying to have, a book that has, a kid with two dads or two moms, which is just commonplace. Like, it's just America. It's modernity, right? And yet they're erasing these whole traditions. And it's really, I think, just disgraceful. And I can't say enough about, wanting to write against that and live against that in every way I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's appalling and hard to see how it's going to turn around. But I agree. I think we need to do everything we can. I agree with Bruce about the Middle Ages. I think it was in the high Middle Ages. It was just starting to gear up.
Yeah.
some of this intolerance towards books. The Canticle, in fact, was partly inspired by Marguerite Porete, who wrote a book, The Mirror of Simple Souls, which is a remarkable book. And it's amazing that it has lasted until today. It was deemed heretical by the church, and they burned the book, and she rewrote it. And she went up for trial, and they brought her to trial, and she wouldn't speak against it. She wouldn't recant the book. So they ended up burning both her and the book in 1310, but a copy escaped. It was actually attributed to a man until 1946, when somebody realized it was Marguerite Porete's book. And so she had the privilege of being both banned and burned, or executed and erased, if you will. So there definitely was some of that happening. And a big theme in Canticle is people wanting to read for themselves. With the Crusades, had brought back a lot of new things to the European cities, and merchant class began to grow, and they needed to be able to read. And so more and more people could read in their own vernacular language, Dutch or Flemish in the case of Canticle, and yet you couldn't read the Bible. Not only was the printing press still 100 years away, but, the Bible was exclusively provided in Latin, copied in Latin, and people couldn't read it. And so this was the beginnings of when people were starting to learn enough Latin to make translations, but they could get you in real trouble, because if the church didn't find them completely accurate, and the church was pretty picky, you and your manuscript could get in a lot of trouble. So Canticle is about the story of these women who say, God decides whether we spend eternity in heaven or hell, and yet Rome won't let us read his word. So I think there's banning, and then there's other forms of control as well.
Yeah, there's a wonderful debate, a huge debate about biblical translation in 14th century Oxford, which results in the Wycliffite Bible, like one of the first biblical translations into English. And people who own the Bible can get in huge trouble if they own the Bible in English. And it even gets to the point where people who own a copy of the Canterbury Tales get in trouble. Of Chaucer, written in vernaculars, because he plays around with religious questions all the time. So yeah, it's like the history of banning books goes back all the way to the beginning of books, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah, I think that's right as well. We've been talking about technology and AI and all of this stuff, and it's not lost on me that, we're talking about banning books off library shelves in an age when we're walking around with computers in our pockets, and our kids are. Why do you think books are so powerful? Why do you think they're so dangerous to people? Jump ball for either of you.
I suppose books contain stories, and stories can have heroes that you identify with who do transgressive things, right? They can be ways of escaping authority. They can, I think about the a very scandalous book in the Middle Ages, Boccaccio's Decameron, which is about, rich people escaping a plague, right? And telling dirty stories to each other for 10 days. And I think just stories can be very powerful. And people like to, if you imagine your world otherwise, that can be very threatening.
Yeah. I would say, to me, stories are a way of, like living many lives at one time. You get to try out all sorts of different lives. And I think there's such an important source of empathy, and that's where the banned book really hurts, is because, it withdraws empathy from some of the people who need it most.
Yeah, totally agree.
Nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Well, we're bumping up against our time limit here. I guess one final question to go out is, what's next? I'd love to know what you're both working on for your next projects, and more broadly, how you see this future unfolding for readers and writers in this really sort of frenetic moment of book banning and social upheaval. So kind of a big question to close out on, but we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Janet first.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm trying to write a modern day character. So I've got a modern day historian. She's going to be a medieval historian. She is hot on the trail of Julian of Norwich's lost manuscript.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So Julian of Norwich was an anchoress, a hermit, a religious hermit who wrote in the 14th century. And her actual manuscript, the original, is lost, but copies have survived. And so I'm going to trace it through 1623 during the Reformation, when some young would-be nuns escape with it across the channel to start a convent in France, and then pick it up again at the French Revolution, when, of course, clergy are being threatened in the other direction. So I'm excited about that one. It's a ton of research, which I love. I just get lost in the research. As for the future of books and what we can do, I mean, I think we need to support our libraries. We need to support our independent bookstores. We need to support any way that people can read. It feels crucial. There's so much at stake right now, and let's at least hold that. Let's hold that sacred.
Amen. I'll pick up on that, just saying that we also need to really, really support young readers. I don't write YA or children's books, although I want to. I've thought about maybe expanding a bit and going in that direction. But I really am. I'm very concerned about my students and the ability to read, the ability to sustain attention, to get through a book in our age of AI, and digestibility of text. My own next project is a novel called The Beta Test, which is about fathers and sons and the so-called masculinity crisis, a sketchy wilderness program, and I guess the general problem of masculinity in an age of creeping authoritarianism. So that's what I've been thinking about lately. Real cheery.
Well, that's a good enough for us to close out on.
Yeah.
Bruce Holsinger, the book is Culpability. It's fantastic. It's out now. Do pick it up. And Janet Rich Edwards, the book is Canticle, which is out in December, right? December 2nd? Do
December
I have that
2nd.
date right?
Yep.
So definitely keep that on your must-read list. Thank you both for joining us for BAM Books Week Live. And, look forward to reading what's next. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.